All right, diving right in. Today we're tackling Let's Talk Defense by Brown. And honestly, I've been looking forward to this one. I mean, this book is a coaching Bible, right? I've heard so many coaches praise it over the years.
Yeah, and it's a classic for good reason. Herb Brown, working with his brother, the legendary Larry Brown, they've coached at every level you can imagine. They really understand the ins and outs of, well, building that suffocating defense.
And you've pulled out some really cool excerpts for us to dig into today. One thing that really jumped out at me was how the Browns view defense, not just as a part of the game, but as the great equalizer.
It's really interesting how they stress that defense can elevate any team, even those that, might not be offensive powerhouses. It's all about, respecting the game and playing the right way. These ideas pop up throughout the book.
Yeah. It's like they're saying, even without the most talented players, you can compete and win by playing tough, disciplined defense.
Exactly. The Browns really advocate for this kind of whole approach to playing the right way. It's about defending tenaciously, rebounding like crazy, running the floor with purpose, blocking shots, sharing the ball. All those things working together create a winning culture.
And they dive deep into the idea that trust is like absolutely key on defense, particularly when it comes to weak side help.
Yeah, it's not just about each guy guarding their man. It's about this understanding that help defense is a shared responsibility. Everyone needs to be ready to rotate, to anticipate, support each other.
It's like a well-oiled machine, every part crucial for it to run smoothly. Now, getting into specifics, the book's full of advice on improvement. One thing that grabbed me was this idea that players should never repeat mistakes.
Absolutely, but the Browns get that correcting mistakes requires a delicate approach. They have this coaching technique they call the sandwich theory.
Okay, before we jump into that, I want to shift gears a bit. The book talks about how important communication is between the coach and key players, like the point guard and the captain. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, regular communication is vital, right? When coaches hold meetings with these key players, to talk about strategy, goals, even areas for improvement, it can make a big difference. It gives players a voice, a sense of ownership in the team's success.
It's about empowering those players and making them feel like they're part of the decision-making process, right?
Exactly. And this idea of empowerment, it actually connects back to the sandwich theory you mentioned.
I see where you're going with this.
Mhm.
So tell me, how does this sandwich approach work?
So picture this. You start by complimenting a player on something they did well. That's your first slice of bread, right?
Hmm.
Then you offer constructive criticism about the mistake they made. That's the filling. And finally, you end with another positive comment, reinforcing their strengths. That's your other slice of bread.
It's a way to give feedback that's helpful and encouraging at the same time, right?
Exactly. It's about creating this positive environment for learning where players feel supported and motivated to improve.
I'm all for that approach. It fits perfectly with what we try to do here, encouraging our listeners to grow without feeling discouraged. Now, let's step back from the encore stuff for a sec and look at the big picture. The book goes beyond just the X's and O's and dives into the importance of staff and team organization. What stood out to you in this section?
Well, the Browns really highlight the importance of trust and delegation within the coaching staff itself, kind of like how trust is key between players. The book actually gives a glimpse into how Larry Brown, a legendary coach, structured his staff.
Oh, interesting. What was his approach?
He believed in rotating responsibilities amongst his assistants. He'd assign tasks like scouting, film breakdown, individual player meetings to different coaches, really fostering development and that shared sense of responsibility.
I like that. It helps develop the coaches and encourages open communication and a real collaborative approach. Now, back to the nuts and bolts of defense. There's a part in the book where Herb Brown gets super specific, talking about techniques like bumping or chucking all cutters and fronting the post player. What's the goal with these tactics?
It's about disrupting the offense, making them uncomfortable, like constantly throwing obstacles in their path.
So you're forcing them to make bad decisions and take tough shots.
Exactly. Those techniques you mentioned are just a few ways to create that defensive pressure. Another one that stood out to me was slipping screens.
Oh, yeah. Slipping screens, it's a subtle but super effective way to counter an offensive screen. Yeah. Instead of getting totally blocked, the defender, they kind of slip past the screener and stay with their player.
It takes anticipation and quickness, but it can totally throw off the offense's play. The book also gets into these advanced NBA shadow or tilt defensive principles, which are, well, a bit more complex.
Before we get into that, I want to know more about how these ideas are actually taught and practiced. The book seems to be big on drills that, simulate actual game situations.
Repetition, building that muscle memory, those are crucial for instinctive reactions on the court. The Browns emphasize drills that range from basic footwork to defending specific plays, like the 3-on-3 full court drill and the 4-on-4 half court shell support drill.
So these drills really force players to apply what they know in a dynamic setting, making those decisions under pressure, which is exactly what they'll face during a game.
Exactly. It's one thing to grasp the concepts, but another to actually put them into practice in the heat of the moment.
And there's that recurring theme of pressure on the ball. The book says the dribble or pass should always draw defenders to the ball to shrink the floor. Why is that idea so important?
This ties right into stopping dribble penetration, one of the foundations of the Browns' defensive philosophy. By shrinking the floor, you're limiting what the offense can do, forcing quicker decisions.
Leading to more turnovers, rush shots, and fewer points for the other team, right?
Exactly. It's about dictating the pace, the flow of the game, turning defense into a weapon.
Speaking of dictating the flow, we can't forget about rebounding, something the book dedicates a lot of time to. What are some of the key takeaways about rebounding?
The Browns are big on relentless boxing out. They emphasize how controlling the boards stops those second chance opportunities for the other team, keeps those possessions alive for you.
It's about shutting down those possessions for good, not giving the offense any freebies. Every possession is a battle, and rebounding's a key part of winning that battle. Now, the book also dives into individual defensive skills. It seems they're saying that individual excellence is just as important as team cohesion, wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. The book covers techniques like guarding against direct fakes, controlling the opponent's movement, and that crucial ball-you-man positioning, preventing easy access to the basket.
One thing I thought was really interesting was the mention of Pete Carroll's, the legendary Princeton coach. His favorite drill where players were only rewarded for defensive stops.
It really puts that focus on defense, doesn't it? It's this powerful reminder that stopping points is as important as scoring them.
And of course, communication, so crucial for any strong team defense.
Calling out screens, switching smoothly, communicating those rotations, all essential for a good defensive unit.
It's about being on the same page, anticipating each other, reacting as one. Now, moving on to some of those more advanced tactics, starting with trapping and double teaming.
These techniques are used strategically, to force turnovers and disrupt the offense's flow. The book points out specific spots where trapping can be really effective, like forcing the ball handler into a corner or trapping in the post.
So you're creating situations to isolate the ball handler and pressure them into making a mistake.
Exactly. And one of the most valuable insights I got from the book was the emphasis on teaching players how to seal the trap properly. It stops the offensive player from splitting the defenders and getting away.
Sealing the trap is key to making this aggressive tactic work. It can mean the difference between forcing a turnover and, well, giving up an easy basket. Speaking of disrupting the offense, the book talks about the value of having a variety of defenses, not just sticking to man-to-man.
Yeah, absolutely. Having options like a full court press, zone defenses, or even mixing those up keeps the offense guessing, stops them from getting comfortable.
I liked the examples they used, like John Wooden's zone press followed by man-to-man, and Ed Krinsky's system of switching defenses based on who scored.
It highlights the importance of being able to adapt and having different tools in your defensive toolbox. It's not about one perfect defense, it's about adjusting to different situations, exploiting weaknesses.
Now, I'm really interested in the book's advice on handling in-game scenarios that need strategic thinking, like defending those out-of-bounds plays or those nail-biting end-of-game situations. What are some key insights there?
In those moments, player awareness of time, score, fouls, it all becomes super important. The Browns really stress the importance of practicing for these situations, like defending those out-of-bounds plays, those late-game moments, free throws, so players can react decisively under pressure.
It's about having a plan for those pressure moments, so you minimize errors and take advantage of opportunities. Before we wrap up this part of our dive, I want to touch on a topic that often gets overlooked, but is so crucial for any good defense: scouting.
Scouting is essential for shaping your defensive game plan. Knowing your opponent's habits, their strengths, their weaknesses lets you tailor your approach, exploit any holes in their game.
The book even mentions pro teams having dedicated scouts providing these detailed reports on other teams, analyzing everything from their plays to individual player tendencies. It's amazing how much goes into building a championship-level defense.
It shows how deep the strategy of the game is, the importance of being ready for anything.
Now, let's move on to part 2 of our deep dive,
Right.
where we'll keep uncovering those defensive gems from Let's Talk Defense.
Sounds good to me. And you know what's really cool? Let's Talk Defense goes beyond just that pregame scouting stuff. The Browns highlight how important it is to keep learning, keep improving all season long.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Defense isn't something you just set up and forget about, right?
Mm-hmm.
It needs constant attention, constant tweaking, just like any other skill.
Right. And to help with that, the book's got tons of drills to reinforce those key defensive concepts.
It's like they've given us this whole playbook full of strategies and tactics to keep those opponents off balance. I'm curious about those drills. Any that really jumped out at you?
One that caught my eye was the defensive shadow drill. It helps players develop that anticipatory awareness, almost like, a chess player thinking a few moves ahead.
Oh, interesting. How's that one work?
So you've got a player on offense, right? And then the defender mirrors their every move, staying a step ahead, predicting what they'll do next. It builds that ball you man positioning we talked about, forces defenders to be proactive, not just reactive.
So it's not just about reacting to the offense, it's about dictating the terms of engagement. I like that.
That's a big theme in the book, The Browns constantly emphasize disrupting the offense's flow, making them uncomfortable, pushing them into rushed decisions.
It's like making every possession a battle, not giving an inch of space without a fight.
Precisely. And that can be done through all sorts of techniques, from aggressive on-ball pressure to perfectly timed help defense.
Speaking of disrupting the offense, one thing that's always fascinated me is trapping. It seems so high risk, high reward, What do the Browns have to say about trapping?
They actually spend a good chunk of the book talking about trapping, outlining both the good and the bad. They emphasize the timing, communication, anticipation. Those are all crucial.
It's got to be like this perfectly coordinated dance, everyone knowing their role, executing it flawlessly.
Exactly. And they give specific scenarios where trapping can really work, like forcing the ball handler into a corner or trapping the ball in the post.
Those situations create a chance to isolate the ball handler, pressure them into a mistake.
Exactly. And one of the best things I learned was how much they stress teaching players to seal the trap the right way. That stops the offensive player from splitting the defenders and getting free.
Sealing the trap is key to making that aggressive tactic pay off. It could be the difference between forcing a turnover and giving up a basket.
Switching gears a little, I'm curious about the book's approach to defending one of the most common plays, the pick and roll. The play that's given countless defenders nightmares.
Oh yeah, the Browns have a whole chapter on defending the pick and roll, and they offer some really sharp strategies.
Okay, lay it on me. What are some key takeaways there?
Well, first off, they stress communication and teamwork. To defend the pick and roll well, you need seamless coordination between everyone involved. It's about being in sync, anticipating each other's moves, reacting as one unit.
Right. And the book lays out different techniques for defending various pick and roll situations. You've got hedging, switching, trapping. Each one has pros and cons. And the choice depends on the situation, who's on the court.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach. It's about having a toolkit of different techniques and knowing when to use each one.
Exactly. And the book goes beyond just explaining. They've got examples, diagrams to show you how to execute each technique well.
That kind of detail is gold for coaches and players.
Mm-hmm.
It really helps you visualize those concepts, understand the ins and outs of each strategy.
And like we talked about earlier, practice, practice, practice. It's not enough to just know it in your head. You got to drill it till it's second nature.
Muscle memory is key when you need to react quickly in a game. You can't be thinking about the mechanics when the offense is coming at you full speed.
Absolutely. It's got to be instinct. Now, let's talk about defending specific plays.
Every team's got those go-to plays, ones they run over and over to score.
And a good defense needs to be ready to shut those down. Let's talk defense. Really breaks down how to defend a wide range of plays, everything from backdoor cuts and post-ups to, flex cuts and isolation plays.
It's like they've given you the answers to the opponent's playbook.
They even have detailed diagrams, step-by-step instructions for each play, so there's no confusion.
That's super helpful for coaches and players. Takes out the guesswork. Now, I'm curious about zone defense. It's always seemed interesting to me because it needs a different kind of awareness compared to man-to-man.
You're right. You're responsible for an area, not a specific player. It requires reading the offense, anticipating passes, being in the right spot at the right time.
It's about understanding how the offense flows and working together, clogging those passing lanes, denying penetration, forcing tough shots.
Exactly. And Let's Talk Defense breaks down different zone defenses, from the classic 2-3 zone to more unusual ones like the 1-3-1 and the box and one.
It's amazing to see the variety of defenses out there.
It really shows the creativity and strategic depth of basketball. And Browns don't just explain them, they give you the details on how to run them effectively. Positioning, rotations, communication, trapping, they cover it all.
Now let's focus on defending those special situations.
Yeah.
What does the book say about handling those high-pressure moments?
Special situations, those are the times that need strategic thinking, decisive action, like defending out of bounds plays, late game scenarios, or when you got a foul to stop the clock. The Browns give some great advice for these, stressing preparation and mental toughness.
So having a plan for each situation is key. That way players can just react, execute perfectly under pressure.
Exactly. The book really hammers home practicing these scenarios over and over. That way, when the game's on the line, it's all muscle memory.
That practice can make all the difference, especially in tight games where every possession counts. Now, before we finish up this part, I want to touch on conditioning, something we often forget about, but which is so important for defense.
You can't play that intense, suffocating defense if you're not in top shape, right?
For sure, you need the stamina, the endurance to maintain that intensity for a whole game.
The Browns actually have a whole section on conditioning, with drills and exercises to get players ready for the demands of playing defense.
So those drills are about building endurance, agility, and explosiveness, all those things you need to be a defensive force.
And it's not just the physical stuff. Mental conditioning matters just as much. Defense takes focus, discipline, this relentless determination to outwork the other guy.
It's that refuse-to-lose attitude, that commitment to making every defensive possession a battle.
Precisely. Herb Brown really emphasizes that throughout the book. He believes defense is a choice, a commitment to playing the right way with effort and intensity.
It's about being proud of your defense, making it a defining part of your team. Now, as we move into the last part of our deep dive into Let's Talk Defense, I'm really curious, what are your biggest takeaways from this book?
Well, as we wrap up our look at Let's Talk Defense, one thing that really resonated with me was Herb Brown's emphasis on, enjoying the process of building a great defensive team. It's not just about winning or losing, it's about those challenges, the hard work, the camaraderie of striving for, defensive excellence.
Yeah, it's about finding that joy in the journey, not just the end result. I like that.
And it goes beyond basketball, really. It applies to anything you're passionate about, anything you're trying to excel at. It's about that fulfillment you get from pushing yourself, learning, growing, regardless of what happens in the end.
So true. It's embracing that growth mindset, finding satisfaction in the pursuit of improvement. Now, before we finish up, I wanted to touch on a couple more specific things from the book. One that caught my eye was Herb Brown's deny and chase technique.
Oh yeah, that's a perfect example of how to put relentless pressure on the ball handler. You deny that first pass, but then you keep chasing them, even after they get rid of the ball.
So you're not just stopping that initial pass, you're disrupting the whole flow of the offense. By constantly applying pressure, you force them to make quick decisions, which can lead to turnovers, bad shots.
Exactly. You're turning defense into an offensive weapon, not just reacting to what they do.
I love that aggressive mindset. Another concept I found interesting was shrinking the floor. The book really stresses how important it is to bring defenders towards the ball. What makes that so crucial?
Shrinking the floor is all about taking away options for the offense. By forcing the ball towards the sideline or the baseline, you close down those passing lanes and make it much harder for them to penetrate.
So you're kind of creating a funnel, forcing them into a tighter and tighter space, making it tough for them to run their offense.
Exactly. That pressure leads to turnovers, rush shots, and ultimately fewer points on the board for them. Before we wrap up this deep dive, I wanted to mention one last thing from Let's Talk Defense that really hit home for me.
I'm all ears. What is it?
Herb Brown talks about creating a defensive identity for your team. It's about establishing this culture where defense is valued, celebrated, part of everything you do.
So it's about making defense a source of pride, something that sets your team apart.
Exactly. And it's not just the players, it's the coaches, the staff, everyone involved.
It's building that collective mindset that defense is non-negotiable. a core principle.
And when you get that, when you build that defensive identity, it can really take your team to the next level.
So there you have it, folks. Our deep dive into Herb Brown's Let's Talk Defense. We've covered everything from those fundamentals like boxing out and pressuring the ball to more advanced stuff like trapping, zone defense, defending specific plays.
We've looked at coaching techniques like that sandwich theory we talked about, the importance of communication, as well as scouting, conditioning, and building that defensive identity.
And more than anything, we've learned that defense is more than just a part of the game. It's a mindset, a commitment to being your best, a journey that can be both tough and incredibly rewarding.
So now we want to hear from you. What are your takeaways from this deep dive? What defensive concepts resonated most with you?
Share your thoughts, your big aha moments, any questions you have about Let's Talk Defense. Until next time, keep that defensive fire burning.